Alright guys, welcome back to the Guitar Max channel. Let's talk about hair metal. Specifically, Loudwire thinks that they have compiled the top 30 list of the greatest hair metal albums of all time. I took a quick look at it and I think they made some good choices and then some others they're totally way off on. I know that here on the Guitar Max channel I have a lot of viewers who are hair metal fans, so I want to get your input on this. So we're going to go through this together, all 30 of them, and see what they got right and see what they got wrong. Now real quick guys, if you enjoy videos like this, checking out cool guitars and also staying up on all the latest news in the guitar universe, and you have not already subscribed for some reason, please consider subscribing right now. Okay, let's go ahead and take a look at this. This is over on Loudwire, the top 30 hair metal albums. Okay guys, so starting in reverse order with number 30, they've got Pride by White Lion, 1987. Let's see what they say here. White Lion's name is so dearly intertwined with the two Pride power ballads, Wait and When the Children Cry, that the rest of the album is often overlooked. Well, it's getting its due credit here, especially with the way Vito Bratta adds a layer of glitter to the razor edge of his brawny riffing. This gutter slime meets glamour style was best exemplified on songs like the empowering Don't Give Up and the cinematic Lady of the Valley. Anyway, that's my best Mike Tramp impersonation, which is terrible, I know. And yeah, my feeling on this one is this is a great album. White Lion, Pride. White Lion is a great hair metal band, and this is a great album from the band. And they've got it here at number 30. I could see it even being higher, but that all has to do with what else they have on their list here. So let's go ahead and look at number 29. So far, I think we're off to a good start because that's a solid album for sure. Okay, so number 29 is the self-titled Faster Pussycat album from 1987. I mean, it's a pretty good album. Let's see what they're saying about this here. Faster Pussycat's hair days were short-lived before they made the switch to more blues-based rock. Their eponymous debut stands as their lone true glam contribution, and it's a damn fine one at that. Armed with tracks like Fun Grooving, Bathroom Wall, and the relatable Don't Change That Song, it's a shame the band didn't stick with the hair sound and develop it even further. Yeah, they make a valid point here, because I feel like Faster Pussycat is really, even though they went in a different musical direction after this, the band is still always associated with hair metal. Maybe they would have been better off if they just stuck doing hair metal, but at this point, who knows? So they've got this at 29. I mean, this is certainly not a bad album, but when you're going for the top 30, I don't know if I would include this in here, and I think I would put White Lion higher than this one. So let's see what else they have here. Okay, number 28, Y&T, Mean Streak from 1983. So I'm a big Y&T fan, and this is a great album from them. Mean Streak, the track is a great song. And also this is from 1983, which is really the kind of very beginnings of the hair metal phase, I think. So let's see what they say about this. By their fifth album, Y&T were on a certified hot streak, but if you asked them, they called it a mean streak. It was the first from the California act to break into the Billboard 200 in the US with the title track and Midnight. That's actually Midnight in Tokyo. They got the name wrong. Serving as the best representations of T-top cruising tracks from the album's 9 cuts. Okay, so I agree with this choice. This is a great album. It's got a lot of great songs from a great band, cool cover artwork. The only thing is this is maybe less of a hair metal album than a lot of the other choices that are on this list. But for that reason, I kind of see it being a little lower on the list, like number 28, the position it's in. So I think they got this one right. Okay, number 27, they've got Badlands, the self-titled Badlands album from 89. I am really very surprised that this is not higher on the list. This is definitely like bluesy hair metal. It's got Jake E. Lee on guitar. This is after he was with Ozzy. This album is a big deal, and it still sounds amazing today. I think this should be higher for sure. They're saying here Badlands is one of the era's least recognized albums, but with songs like High Wire and Dreams in the Dark kicking off the record, the momentum never waned. I don't think it's least recognized. I mean, maybe it's not as popular as like a Ratt album or something like that, but I feel like most people who know hair metal know Badlands. Okay, number 26, Slaughter, Stick It To Ya, 1990. I was always a huge fan of this album cover. Guys, I'll let you imagine why that is. But yeah, this is a great album, and Slaughter is definitely a hair metal band. So let's see what they say about this here. Slaughter were one of the last bands to cash in on the hair metal phenomenon before Nirvana swiftly wiped out the craze. Their Stick It To Ya debut album ultimately went double platinum with heavy airplay and video rotation on MTV. Yeah, and something they talk about here, and this is totally true. This is an album that had just a ton of hit songs on it. I mean, you've got Up All Night, Fly to the Angels, Eye to Eye, Burning Bridges, Mad About You, Gave Me Your Heart. Cause I'm mad about you, burning bridges. Don't worry, guys, I'm going to stop singing. Okay, so Slaughter, Stick It To Ya, they've got this at number 26. I think it could be higher on the list. This is a perfect choice for a list like this. I'm not really sure why they have it so low, especially when this particular album had so many hit songs on it. But let's see what else they have here. Okay, number 25, Razormaid, First Cut. So this is not a bad album by any means. I mean, there's a lot of good songs on it. It's a very fun album, like, to sing along with in the car. There's a lot of, like, shout choruses, you know, Blue Thunder, you know, like, you got a bunch of, like, a gang of people singing the chorus. So yeah, this is definitely not a bad album. It's a solid album, but I just don't know if this is as good as the other stuff that's on this list. It's certainly not as polished sounding. I definitely think like White Lion, Wait would be higher than this album. So part of me thinks that Loudwire just wanted to be clever and put an album that is not very well known on this list, so people would go, oh, sophisticated, right? Yeah, and again, it's not a bad album, but there's so many other albums that are at least as good as this one is. So I don't really think this should be on the list. Not in the top 25 anyway. Okay, let's see what else they have here. So now we go from Razormaid to a band which is much more well known, Poison. Open Up and Say Ah, 1988. They've got this at number 24. And they say here, following the overwhelming success of their debut, Poison were having nothing but a good time after the release of Open Up and Say Ah. Writing about a heartbreaking relationship experience, Bret Michaels authored the power ballad Every Rose Has Its Thorn, which topped the charts as a single. Fallen Angel showcased the attitude in CeCe DeVille's guitar playing, supported by lyrics about starry-eyed Hollywood dreams. So, yeah, I think this is a pretty good choice, right? Obviously, when you think of hair metal, you think of Poison. And this was one of their big albums, so I don't see any reason why this shouldn't be on the list. As albums go, it's very good, not the best. So, yeah, at number 24, I think Loudwire got this one right. Okay, next up, Enough's Enough. At number 23, Strength, 1991. So 91, this is, you know, kind of the end of the hair metal era, right? The other, you know, other bands like Firehouse and stuff that came sort of right at the end. Enough's Enough were latecomers to the proverbial and quite literal party when it came to the hair sensation. While their sophomore album, Strength, didn't light up the charts, it's held up considerably well for a record that did little to move the needle in 1991. Strength finds blue-collar riffs colliding with washy, synth-laden atmospheres, finally doing something to set a band apart from the Sunset Strip mainstays, rather than blindly imitate them. So, I agree that you shouldn't be looking for albums that just totally were derivative of other hair metal bands, but at the same time, this album is much less of a hair metal album. So I don't have any problem with somebody putting an Enough's Enough album on this list, but I wouldn't put this album in a top 30 hair metal list. Okay, next, coming in at number 22, I'm glad they put this on here, because who says all great hair metal albums were made during the hair metal era? What about Steel Panther? Or you could even talk about like Santa Cruz or some of the like Scandinavian hair metal bands that came much, much later. So at number 22, they've got Steel Panther, Feel the Steel from 2009. And what do they say here? Don't like Steel Panther? Now is a good time to just get over it. The subject matter in glam metal may not rival Shakespeare until now. Frontman Michael Starr, equipped with a PhD in English literature, put his degree to good use with plenty of wordplay and foreplay on Feel the Steel. There's no denying the writing chops from the band on the whole, and with Asian Hooker, Community Property, Eatin' Ain't Cheatin', and really everything else on the album, Steel Panther successfully pulled off a brilliant hair metal album in the 2000s. So I think Loudwire nailed this one right here. Yeah, it's a great album. It is obviously a hair metal album, and I think it deserves to be this high on the list. Maybe even higher, but I'm happy with number 22, what they've got here. Okay, so now we go to number 21, and we've got Twisted Sister, Under the Blade, 1982. So this album, I would argue, is an important hair metal album. It's a very influential hair metal album. Is it a good album? You know, does being important and influential, does that make something good? I don't think so. And I think quality-wise, in terms of like the songs and the songwriting, I don't think this really stands up to a lot of the other bands and albums that are on this list. Now, that being said, this was a very successful album. They sold a ton of copies of these things. So, you know, if you're judging quality on units sold, then maybe you do have an argument for Twisted Sister here. And number 21, well, at least they didn't put it like in the top 5 or something. Okay, let's see what's next. Number 20, David Lee Roth, Eat 'Em and Smile, 1986. Let's see what they say here, and then we'll talk about it. Out of Van Halen, David Lee Roth had no problem securing an all-star lineup on his first solo full-length. With the acrobatic Steve Vai on guitar, he arguably raised Eddie Van Halen's bar with even more adept shredding and emotive phrasing. Add Billy Sheehan on bass and Greg Bissonette behind the kit, and you've got 30 minutes of madness on Eat 'Em and Smile. Yankee Rose screamed with the same youthful pride as any classic Van Halen track and was the obvious hit, but Elephant Gun and the racing Shy Boy, which I really love Shy Boy. Anyway, Shy Boy would have likely yielded similar results. Yeah, this, I would put this album even higher. I don't think this should be down at the 20 mark. This was a huge album. It was an important album, right, because it was David Lee Roth leaving Van Halen, leaving this huge band, going out on his own. There was a lot of anticipation for this album. You know, he was pulling in the musicians that were just the other musicians like him that were huge at the time. And to have all that pressure and all that expectation and then to put out a killer album like this, I think that was a huge accomplishment. And you listen to these songs, number one, it's obviously hair metal, and number two, there's really good songs on this album. And it was a massive commercial success. So this is a great choice for this list, but I would put it even higher. I think they put it too low here. Okay, let's see what's next. Great White, Twice Shy, 1989. So first of all, let's just appreciate this cover artwork here. We've got a couple of ladies wearing red silk sheets and nothing else, some ankle bracelets or whatever, and then there's a shark fin going through the sheets. This is almost as good of a cover as the Slaughter Stick It To You cover. Yeah, but this is, you know, not just the cover, but this is a great album. They're saying here, Great White's fourth record landed the band their biggest hit yet. The Twice Shy title played off the previous album, Once Bitten, and thematically worked its way into their smash hit cover of Ian Hunter's Once Bitten, Twice Shy. That's a good point, and a lot of people who like this band, Great White, don't always know that that song is actually a cover. It goes on here, they still found time for lovin', however, especially on Mr. Bone, which houses a riff so sultry, it's recommended you wear protection just while listening to it. And actually watch the music video for Mr. Bone as well. Okay, so now we're getting into the top 20 here. This is a solid choice. This is a great album, great hair metal album, and 1989, I think this might have been the peak of hair metal. So yeah, this is a great choice. Okay, at number 18, we've got Warrant, Dirty, Rotten, Filthy, Stinking Rich from 1989, same year as the Great White Album. Warrant is, I think, a band that kind of got a bad deal in that they are basically known by most people for Cherry Pie, the video and the song, and that's how people think of Warrant. There are so many other great songs from Warrant, and yeah, you know, classic album artwork right there. Yeah, this is a really good choice. I think Loudwire got this one right. Okay, at number 17, they've got Kix, Blow My Fuse, 1988. You know, Kix to me is one of those bands that they never quite got to that high level like Poison or Ratt. But yeah, Kix was a very consistent band. They had a lot of good albums, a lot of great songs. I think you could argue that, I don't know, maybe, you know, where you want to place this album in the list, but I think it definitely should be on the list. I would, you know, take out Twisted Sister and keep Kix. Okay, number 16, Tesla, Mechanical Resonance, 1986. Now guys, look, I want to be totally honest with you, and this is not to throw shade at Tesla, the band. I never quite got it. It's a good band, you know, very good musicians, they've got some good songs, but it just never really hit home for me. Compared to other bands, especially bands that are on this list, you know, Tesla just seemed kind of like a hair metal jam band. It always felt like you couldn't find anything technically wrong with what they were doing, but it just never had the right chemistry, at least for me. But hey, I know some people love this band. But personally, yeah, if I was making this list, I wouldn't even have them here. Okay, now we go from that to an album which, I mean, this, you could almost call this number one. Winger, the self-titled Winger album from 1988. Let's see what they say about this album here. Winger's self-titled debut naturally gets attention because of the popular track 17 and its questionable subject matter. You know, hey, Kiss had Christine 16, 17. None of the ladies that like Kip Winger are complaining about this, right? Anyway, they go on here. It somehow became a hit despite the age of censorship and stands as one of hair metal's downright sleaziest moments. Winger was more challenging than like-minded albums, with the band focusing on complex arrangements and time signatures rather than going for the obvious songwriting punchlines. Winger, the band, is great. I mean, the songs that they're doing, you know, they've continued making albums. They still kind of have the same sound, but they're just, I don't know, the songs are just more complex, but in a way that is always listenable. So yeah, Winger, you know, Kip Winger is still out there doing his thing, and the band is still doing good. And this album is a hair metal masterpiece. Okay, so this next album, no hair metal top album list, or even 80s metal album list, I think would be complete without this album. Coming in at number 14, Dokken, Tooth and Nail from 1984. Another extremely influential album from the first half of the 80s. Now, naturally, I'm a huge George Lynch fan, and this album really highlights his playing. I think Tooth and Nail was just the right combination of sort of 80s like glam and hair metal, but still with some really hard riffs and aggressive guitar playing. They've got this listed at number 14, and I think that's a pretty good position for it, although I could even see it being in the top 10. Let's see what else they have here. Okay, so number 13, they've got Motley Crue, Dr. Feelgood from 1989. Let's read what they say here. It says, with clearer heads following a rehab stint, Motley Crue entered the studio with Bob Rock to record what became one of the era's biggest selling records, Dr. Feelgood. The robust production put an extra thud in the lumbering title track and the engine revving Kickstart My Heart. So they've a really good point here with the production value of this album, because honestly, some of the earlier Motley Crue albums didn't have the nicest, shiniest production. When you get into that second half of the 80s and sort of the second half of the hair metal era, it was really expected to have really crisp, top-notch production in your albums, because you got to remember, at that time, these were the best-selling albums, like, on the charts, period. And in terms of the production, this was definitely a huge step up for Motley Crue. And I think, honestly, this album right here was the album that propelled Motley Crue to that higher level. If they had never released Dr. Feelgood, if they just had the earlier stuff, I think Motley Crue would be considered one of those, oh yeah, one of those old 80s bands that had like some cool songs back in the day. But Dr. Feelgood was really the album that propelled them to that higher level, to where even today they're just considered like a big band. Now really, there are some other albums that are placed lower on this list that I think are better than this one, but I can understand why they gave it such a high placing here. So I'm not going to argue too much with this one. So they've got it, Motley Crue, Dr. Feelgood at number 13. Now at number 12, and coming in 12th out of 30 is nothing to really thumb your nose at, but the Whitesnake album from '87, this album is massive. I think this should be higher, and you can't really do hair metal without Whitesnake. Now, something that's sort of interesting about this album, which is kind of forgotten sometimes, is some of the tracks had been previously released on, previous Whitesnake albums, and so they kind of, remixed and recorded some new parts, right? Certain tracks like Here I Go Again, and even Still of the Night was actually an older song. And so all of the previous kind of hard work and quality songwriting that had happened on the previous Whitesnake albums, it was all kind of collected and sort of repackaged and polished and perfected and put on this album. And so this album, the self-titled Whitesnake album from '87, I mean, there's a good reason why these songs are still heard so much today. It's just incredible music. So number 12, I mean, that's pretty high. I think this album should be even higher. I think this should easily be in the top 10, maybe the top 5. Okay, and at number 11, they've got Quiet Riot, Metal Health from 1983. The thing about Quiet Riot is, although when we think of them today, we think of them as this classic 80s band, they peaked kind of early in the 80s. Metal Health was really their biggest album, and I think that's what they're really remembered for. Bang Your Head, Metal Health Will Drive You Mad. I think most metalheads all over the world, regardless of whether you like hair metal or not, I mean, you have heard those lyrics. And even though the band never really recaptured the success that they had with this album afterwards, this was such a huge album, it was so important and so successful that it really carried them through the rest of the 80s. So Loudwire is listing this at number 11, and yeah, I can see that. I mean, it's an important album. It's a really good album with great songs. I don't know if I would put it in the top 10, but it's definitely deserves to be close to the top. Okay guys, now we're into the top 10, and in 10th place, they've got Poison, Look What the Cat Dragged In from 1986. Now, I think the songwriting on this album is not nearly as good as a lot of the other hair metal bands of the time, and even compared to other Poison albums. I mean, like Look What the Cat Dragged In is basically just like a fast blues song that they put some hair metal lyrics over. But Poison was a band that was totally larger than life, and they had the music videos and the stage production to make all these songs kind of come to life. And I mean, this came out in '86, and the timing was right. And look, we're talking about hair metal albums, right? And look at this hair. I think you could argue that the genre, hair metal, was basically named after Poison. Okay, now we're on to number 9, and look at this. They've got Def Leppard, Pyromania from 1983. So Def Leppard today is remembered for having these super, super over-the-top, lush production qualities to their albums. And that is still valid. When you listen to this stuff, it's like candy for your ears. And although Def Leppard never really quite had the over-the-top hair metal look that like Ratt or Poison did, the music was right there with everybody else. And I think it's easy to forget today, 30, 35 years later, how popular and successful Def Leppard was. Def Leppard had some of the best-selling albums of all time, and Pyromania was pretty close to the top. So do they deserve to be in the top 10 on a hair metal list? Absolutely. Okay, coming in at number 8 on Loudwire's top 30 hair metal albums is Wasp, the self-titled album from 1984. Yeah, I don't even know if I consider this to be a hair metal album. It's an 80s metal album for sure. Is it hair metal? Well, they kind of have big hair, but they don't have the hair metal sound. When I think of Wasp, I think of Lizzie Borden, maybe. And that band, you can kind of say like, okay, yeah, that was a little bit more hair metal. Wasp was just sort of like a slightly poppy 80s metal band. And this is another one of these albums where it was very important and influential, but I don't know if I would say this is like good in terms of just the overall quality of the songs and the production compared to the other albums that are on this list. So if you want to put this in like a top 30 metal albums from the 80s, fine, I could see this album being in there. But top 30 hair metal albums and in the top 10, no way. I think Loudwire is totally off on this. Okay, but now after that, we get right back into like unapologetic, straightforward hair metal territory with Cinderella Night Songs from 1986. And I take back what I said earlier about Poison being the source of the hair metal like name. I think it was Poison and Cinderella. I mean, look at these dudes here. I think Cinderella was kind of like if you combine the early Motley Crue and the Poison stuff, right? You kind of blended that together, but then you had better songwriting. Sorry, Motley Crue. Cinderella is pretty much what you would come up with if you did that. So this album definitely belongs in a top hair metal albums list. Is it the top 7? I think that's being a bit generous, but I'll let this one slide and we'll see what else they come up with as we get into the top 6 here. Okay, now we are in the top 6 and they've got freaking Twisted Sister again here. This is, I don't agree with this at all. Like, I think whoever came up with this just was like a fan of Twisted Sister. They wanted to put 2 Twisted Sister albums in the top 30, but in the top 6, no way. And look, guys, I'm not saying that Twisted Sister is not a good band, but I'm just saying that the songs from these albums do not compare to the other stuff that's on this list. But you know what? Dee Snider is still making a career out of this today, so clearly somebody likes it. Okay, guys, now we are in the top 5, and boom, at number 5, Bon Jovi, Slippery When Wet from 1986. A lot of these albums are from 86, right? Yeah, I can definitely see this being in the top 5. It's important to remember that this was not Bon Jovi's first album, and he already had, or the band Bon Jovi already had a lot of success even before this one. And so this was kind of like how Dr. Feelgood was to Motley Crue, Slippery When Wet was to Bon Jovi, right? It's like the band was already successful, but this album really propelled them to that next level. And there's so many classic, you know, Living on a Prayer is on here, Wanted Dead or Alive is on here, You Give Love a Bad Name. There are so many huge hits on here that we associate with 80s metal and hair metal in particular. You have to include this. Okay, now we are down to number 4. They've got Skid Row, the self-titled album from 1989. When this came out, everybody was talking about Sebastian Bach. His vocals on this album, and really the following album as well, are just untouchable. And the thing about this album and the songs on this album is this stuff has really stood the test of time. There are so many people today on YouTube who are doing covers of different songs, and if you want to do like a really great vocal cover, you do 18 and Life, or you do Youth Gone Wild, a song like that, because people still love these songs and they're still impressive to hear. So yeah, top 5, number 4, Skid Row from 89. I totally agree with this. Number 3, and I'm surprised we didn't have a Ratt album earlier on this list. You know, if we have 2 Twisted Sister albums, why can't we have 2 Ratt albums? Well, for number 3, they've got Ratt Out of the Cellar from 1984. And this is a great Ratt album. It was a big success for them. There's song, I mean, it's got Round and Round, right, which everybody remembers that song. But I don't know if this was their best album. I think if you're going to choose one Ratt album to put on a list like this, I think maybe you're better off choosing Invasion of Your Privacy. But regardless, no top hair metal album list would be complete without Ratt. So yeah, number 3, absolutely. Okay guys, number 2, we are down to the last 2 out of the top 30 hair metal albums, and they chose Def Leppard Hysteria from 1987. You can't think of hair metal without thinking of Pour Some Sugar on Me, which is from this album. This was Def Leppard's peak. And this really is one of the most successful albums, period, of all time. It has sold more than 20 million copies. It's kind of amazing that the band continued to do anything after this. You know, when you reach 20 million, like of one album sold, you know, just quit while you're ahead. But I don't know, I guess they were just musicians with integrity and they wanted to keep playing their instruments. Now this album had the over-the-top production, and it's a very poppy sounding album, which we associate with hair metal. And usually, you know, the sort of more intellectual hair metal fans like to choose some of the earlier Def Leppard albums, but I've heard in interviews from the band that this is their favorite album. It also happens to be their most successful album. So look, if Hysteria is number 2, what's going to be number 1? Let's check it out. We're down to the last album. Number 1, what is it? Motley Crue, Shout at the Devil. That's what Loudwire is saying is the best hair metal album ever. I disagree with this. I think this is crazy. I think whoever came up with this list lost a few too many tiles on re-entry. Now, the thing with Shout at the Devil is, like some of the other albums that were earlier on the list, this is an important album. It was a very influential album. It came out in '83, and it influenced a lot of bands and songs that came after this. But is it the best album? You know, it's like saying that Nirvana, Nevermind, is the best grunge album because it influenced all these other grunge albums that came afterwards. The first one is rarely, the first version of something is rarely the best. I would put Winger over Shout at the Devil. And again, I'm not saying it's bad, but it's not the best. Put the Whitesnake album as number 1. That would be fine. I mean, the production quality on Shout at the Devil is bad. Even for '83, it's pretty bad. I mean, think about this. They put 2 Motley Crue albums and 2 Twisted Sister albums and 1 Ratt album? Okay guys, but look, I've got to have your input on this. Do you agree with what I'm saying? Do you agree with what Loudwire is saying? Or do you have a different idea altogether? Let me know what you think down in the comments section below. I'm glad you guys were willing to sit through this list with me. I agree with some of it. Some of it I think is totally crazy. I think they got about 2/3 of it correct. But the times where they were wrong, I think they were way wrong. But what do you guys think? Let me know down in the comment section below. Okay guys, that has been it for this video. If you want to check out that list yourself over on the Loudwire website, I'm going to put a link to the original article down in the video description below. I will also have all of my social media and all that stuff down there. Thanks a ton for watching, guys. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, please give me a thumbs up, subscribe if you haven't already, and I will talk to you very soon.